So what I want to talk about today is actually not HDF5. Change it up. Talk about HDF4. Mainly because I've been thinking about this a lot as we've been trying to get HDF4 out the door. And I was gonna have a slide here where I talk about HDF4, but I'm gonna skip over that. I didn't have time to finish that. But so what are we doing with HDF4? I assume everybody here knows HDF4 is not HDF5, that it's incompatible. It uses a simpler set of data types. Um, we basically stopped supporting it. Elena probably can confirm this. At least stopped active development on HDF4 back probably around 2000 when HDF5 came out. So it's basically been in maintenance mode for 2 decades now. So quite a while. I would say that we are committed to the long-term support of that library and the software that and the files that require it. As long as we have the resources to do so, we'll keep cranking it out. There's no new development. We're not. It's been frozen for 2 decades. We're not developing any new features or doing anything with it. And basically, we've been releasing every year or two bug fixes, support for new compilers, things like that. The next release is 4.2.16. Should release later this month. Get support for ARM, including Apple's M1 and M2. When NetCDF functionality is disabled. The NetCDF functionality is kind of a problem on some platforms, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Yeah, and there's to be some fixes in it for reported issues. Users use it and they report seg faults every once in a while, and so we try to fix that stuff. Problems. So there's a bunch of problems with this that make it kind of a pain to support. One of these is that a long time ago in the past, the internal API was exposed to the public. This was back in 1992. You can see where they included the internal headers and started deploying them. And this was not a great idea. It was later walked back. I was looking again. First of all, I'm not an expert on HDF4. I've always been an HDF5 library developer. I'm coming into this now as the director of software engineering, and now I have to support this. And so this is what I'm gleaning from talking to people and from reading the documentation. Elena would know much more about this than I would, because she was at the company at the time. But it looks like it was later walked back. That later documentation, when I look at the users guides, they say that, yeah, like we said this in the past, but you should not use it. But we still deploy it. And so it's still out there in the world. But it makes refactoring extraordinarily difficult, because if you touch anything in any header almost anywhere, then you're potentially going to break some guy at NASA software. And so this is a huge problem, is that we can't refactor meaningfully inside the library. Another problem is that NetCDF 232 from 1993 is jammed inside, so that HDF5 can read a very small subset of NetCDF files. It's a frequent source of problems. And another problem is that we also deploy HDF4 built obsolete versions of NCDump and NCGen and some other and NCTest that conflict with the real NetCDF programs. And so we have several JIRA issues where people tell us to knock that off. But again, if I do that, then somebody at NASA is going to yell at me because they don't have their cranky old version of NCDump. Another problem is that the Fortran interface is fundamentally broken on 64-bit systems. It stores pointers returned from HDF4 API calls and 32-bit Fortran integer values. That works for 32-bit systems. It does not work for 64-bit systems, and we still allow you to build it. So if it works, it just works on accident. Configurations based on hard-coded machine-specific configurations. So new machines like ARM involve updating these configs. They don't just work out of the box because all the if-def soup that they have to chew through will not match out for them. Another problem is that the NetCDF interface relies on XDR. So it's obsolete at this point. It's been removed from glibc. And one of the big problems is that it grew up in the 32-bit world and that made the transition to 64-bit poorly. There's like 3 different ideas about how we're going to handle this, because everything dealt with kind of longs as the lingua franca of integer XDR. And Mac OS decided that what they were going to do is they were going to map your calls to either integer or long, depending on how big a long was. So you always got a 32-bit interface. Linux decided that longs are just 64 bits now, and that's what you get. And other platforms like the Big Iron Ulysses added special integer calls. So it's a huge problem to maintain this stuff, and I really don't want to have a bunch of if-defs to deal with all this stuff. So that's been a huge problem. It's a source of frequent bugs. Another problem is the code is old and poorly maintained. memory leaks, compiler warnings, tests that admit failure but don't actually fail the test, bunch of workarounds and if-def soup for pre-ANSI C. There's K and RC in there, stuff for compilers. There's a type def just in case you don't have void or null. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there, configurations for operating systems that were obsolete when I was in the Navy, like 30 years ago. I mean, just like crazy old stuff in there. A lot of corrupt, a lot of unused stuff, a lot of over-engineered things. There's a giant linked list package that was added in to basically do add exit functionality, which is incorrect because you're pedantically you can't stick a function pointer in a where you put a void pointer. So yeah, so just general sloppiness, a lot of like if-def stuff and print debugging and things where somebody made a new way and then if-def'd out and it says old way. There's just so much stuff. It just makes it so hard to go through and read the code and figure out what to do with things. It looks like students wrote it. So my goals for this. So why are we doing this? Why do we care about HDF4? Besides, the real reason I care about all this is that it's our mission to support these data for perpetuity, because NASA has this problem where they had all those nice real tapes from the 60s and 70s that nobody can read anymore, and all this critical early space data is lost. And we don't want that same thing to happen to HDF4 data, especially a lot of that's climate data, and that's going to be really useful, over the next couple of decades. So we want to keep HDF4 healthy and alive. So we want to switch some things about HDF4 so that it's maintainable in the future, so that we can keep it going for the next 20 or 30 years without it being a big maintenance burden and a headache for everybody who has to go look at it. Also, by doing this, we can encourage more community support. As we've started to noodle around with HDF4 and clean it up, people have come out to work on things and to add fixes. So I'm hopeful that this can become partly sustainable by the community as well as the HDF group. So we want to switch the configuration to being based on feature tests so that it just works on new platforms, so that we don't have to come up with like, some crazy new machine configuration every time, China introduces a new CPU or some new RISC-V thing appears on the market. We want to reduce the maintenance costs while increasing quality. We want to address the Fortran interface deficiencies or get rid of it if we can. One of the two, but we can't keep that crazy old interface around. That thing's just fundamentally broken. And then we want to figure out what to do with the integrated NetCDF and XDR. It's a frequent source of bugs. It's a weird, obscure feature. And if we can get rid of it, it'll significantly reduce the size of the library and what you have to understand. It's very poorly documented as to like what's inside and what needs to be there and how it works. So it's very difficult for us to maintain, for anybody to maintain. In fact, it's so difficult to figure out what to do with that I was talking to the NetCDF people last week, and they said they tried to have a try to fix the deficiencies in it, and they gave up. So that's your clue that this is a mistake, and we should probably remove this thing. And then also another thing is to clearly delineate the public versus private interface, to give people guarantees about what we're actually going to support in the future and what is going to be something that we can refactor away. And then also better communication with the HDF4 community. I feel like I'm coming into this and I have almost no idea who I should go talk to about HDF4 things. I have to crawl through. I'm looking around on the web and trying to see if I can find people who use this stuff or have written wrappers for it. That I would like for HDF4 to just have a better open source community around it. The same thing that we're trying to do with HDF5, that we want to build communities around this so that we know who our customers are, we know who we can ask people about if we want to change something, or if we want people to test on obscure platforms that we don't have that other people consider important. So anyway, recent progress. As you can see, there's been a gigantic spike in development over the past month as we decided to kind of gear up for HDF5 4.2.16. I had so many pull requests in the month of January that like I rescaled the graph so that like everybody else looks like they haven't done anything ever. So as we cleaned up so much junk. So what have we done? So we replaced those machine-specific configurations with configure checks and C99 types. I looked through, there's a bunch of JIRA issues, and the JIRA issues, people have been pointing out in the JIRA issues that they've been telling people in the HDF4 community that we're going to require a C99 compiler for longer, I think, than we've been telling people in the HDF5 community that they're going to require a C99 compiler. So I felt fine putting in 32 T stuff instead of trying to guess like how big things are, right? Just let's use the C99 types. Also, like, you know, there's this big matrix in there of all this crazy stuff like for convex floats and stuff like that. And we kept all the type conversion in there. You can convert things to and from those types. I didn't touch that at all. But there's no platforms that have like Cray floats anymore. So got rid of that stuff as far as configuring. We dramatically expanded the GitHub CI. So that was like 40 some different configurations that get checked. Before we had two, actually there are four, but the Windows and Mac ones were commented out because they were broken. And now it works, it's tested. We don't do ARM cross compiling yet, but one of the people in our company has a config that does that. We're gonna bring that in there. So at least we'll be testing on ARM and GitHub. We've been building with fsanitize equals address and fixing the issues. I think we're down to about 100 now from about 400 from when we first started. Most of these are not real library issues. They're just sloppy tests. So, but we do want this to be fsanitize clean to make sure that there's nothing leaking inside the library. And we did fix a couple of actual library leaks, which are mostly a cleanup. So it wasn't that big of a deal. So yeah, and we brought build system improvements over for HDF5, right? Because we've made many changes to HDF5 over the past decade or so. And it was really easy to just drag that stuff over and drop it into HDF4 to make the build and the configure and build and all the compiler stuff that we did in HDF5. We've just been dragging that over. We removed a lot of dead code, duplicated code. Almost all the pre-ANSI workarounds are gone, except for the ones that break other people's stuff. And those have been removed from the library itself. We just left the type defs and definitions in if people need them. And we're slowly fixing these type mismatch issues, which it's a big problem that this thing grew up in the 32 to 64-bit transition. I feel like a lot of our bugs come from confusion about like how big a long is, especially when we're passing these things through pointers. So we're slowly kind of going through and cleaning up a bunch of that stuff. So this is the release schedule. We will be releasing 4.2.16 probably by the end of this month. I was hoping to have it at the end of January, but we pushed it out to February so we could do a little more work on it. And then we plan to release like once a year just to keep the compilers, even if there's no really big changes, we'll update the build files and stuff the same way that we do HDF5. It's not that difficult to push a release of this out the door. That release date says 4.2.17. If we make bigger changes, that may be 4.3. Maybe we'll go to semantic versioning, although that would be really confusing to have HDF4 version 5. That would probably that's going to be an annoying transition while we do that. But we really should do semantic versioning like we do in HDF5, or plan to do in HDF5. Yeah, that's what I just said here. I'd love to get rid of the netcdf 232 stuff and drop XDR. That'd be very nice. I would like to do a lot of aggressive internal cleanup and to just have a cleaner, more maintainable core library. So once you get rid of that stuff, the stuff that's in the MF HDF directory, the library is not that bad. It's really the sloppy part right now is how inexpertly the netcdf 232 stuff is jammed in there. I think once we get rid of that, it'll be and throw away all the over-engineered cruft, it'll be a much leaner, more maintainable library. So anyway, so that's what I'm thinking about HDF4. I'm open to everything. I do not want to step on people's toes. I do not want to make people at NASA upset with us. I value them as partners, but I do want to fix some of this long-standing, in some cases decades-long technical debt that I think really hampers the library. That we should fix this stuff in like kind of a focused flurry of attention, and then basically we can leave it alone for the next like 20 or 30 years. But it'll be left alone in a good maintainable state where we just really don't have to do anything with it, and it can just be stable code. Thoughts? Especially Elena. I'm very curious to hear what Elena has to say since you spent so much time with HDF4.
First of all, Dana, thank you for doing all this work. I'm really impressed. There were in the past there was huge resistance from my superiors to push in that direction. So I'm glad you're supported.
You know, the number of hours we spent on this was actually a lot lower than you would think. This was a month of like two people for Raytheon's.
No, this is great. That's what. So my concern is, first of all, I disagree with some of your assumptions, but you probably found something that I didn't see in the library, which is fine. So NetCDF, what I know, and Joe Lee is your best, and Kent will be a better people to answer this. But when I was working with HDF4 and HDF4 users, biggest users of HDF4 were DEX that were doing processing of HDF4 data, and I believe data is still coming from some satellites, and it's written in HDF4. Then it's distributed in other formats, but HDF4 is still one of the formats they're using. There are a lot of applications that in the past DEX simply couldn't rewrite. They were like, if we violate backward compatibilities, there were a lot of screams coming from DEX and NASA. So you have to be very careful, and they are your best choice of getting feedback from the users. If you remove NetCDF from HDF, that code, you still have to preserve functionality, and current HDF functionality, you can read NetCDF files, even current NetCDF classic files, which are in NetCDF format, and you can modify them. And NetCDF, like HDF4 by spec, is big engine. You have to do that conversion. So I feel like it will be easy to really rewrite, to preserve functionality, to preserve APIs, and rewrite it.
This is actually what NetCDF did. I took a look at their code, and they removed XDR, and they just do it.
Right. They did it, and actually we were looking. I believe the Mint was looking at that their code, because they shared it with us a long time ago. But it was enormous, job to, as you know now, right, to remove that piece of code. There are interfaces that you can probably drop if you find, like GR interface. Surprisingly, there are still people and old applications, once again, needs to be verified with those high-level interfaces for images. They may not be used. So maybe from all HDF4, you will need to maintain only V groups, V data, and multi-file data, multi-file interface to simplify. But conversation should happen, because a lot of applications will be affected. And it's not only NASA community, you will have people from like Argonne people, I believe they're still at APS, synchrotron centers, they have data in HDF4. So, and there can be other people, but there's two big communities I was working with. So, and that CDF functionality is extremely, once again, was important to users, because they were using one interface to work with NetCDF and HDF4 data. Because that's why you need to find users and talk to them, talk with the DAX. And Joe will be, I believe, Joe and Kent will be your best resource for this.
Right, but if we preserve the API and the behavior, then who cares what's under the hood? Right. What I care about is the bugs, right? And for me, XDR is a buggy interface that has to be managed with great care. And so I would rather just rip that out, replace it with a bunch of C99 integer types, and then like standard like H2ML whatever code to transform.
Right. Also, your biggest user base, I believe, is on Windows, or because people use, NASA scientists that use that data. They're on Windows and Mac, of course.
Right. Yeah, there's not a lot of portability problems in terms of like the platform independent. The code that handles the Windows stuff is much smaller than HDF5. It's really not that big of a, like, if you look around for the Win32 IFDEFs, there's not that many. That most of it is basically boils down to file separators.
Yeah, and Kurt makes a good point that there are a lot of tools, and we have on our website, even, you can look at tools, and GDAL is one. Once again, Joe is working with that. You have to talk to those, because users use HDF4 through tools.
As for Mark's Mark's comment that could we rewrite HDF4? I mean, yes, but I mean that would be, I mean, it would be a lot of work to. It's a much simpler file format than HDF5, and that would be an interesting exercise. But is somebody gonna pay us to do that? I mean, probably not. If they did, I'd be thrilled to rewrite it in Rust or something else. But I feel like for the best we're able to do is kind of like background bug fixing and refactoring as we get time. And in fact, like
yeah, so Danny, just to follow up on that, I'm not at all serious really about a rewrite of HDF4, and in spite of the fact that it looks like you've done a lot of work to it that I think is useful to HDF4 customers. I'm honestly pretty flabbergasted that I see THG putting as much work, at least appears to be, investment into a technology that's 30 plus years old now. I think because there's one big customer out there that's not paying you any money, but nonetheless uses it. I mean,
they pay us money.
They are paying for this.
Yeah.
That's great to hear.
I'm
really, really happy to hear that.
That's funded. I'm not doing this also willy-nilly. I mean, there's two reasons for me to do this, right? One is I don't want this to be we're on the hook to maintain it, right?
No, that's great to hear. I had the thinking cap on that this was just because it was a pain to continue to maintain, and if someone's actually paying for it, that's really good to hear. Which actually then means I don't need to make any of my other remarks, because I had a handful of other remarks about this, but I don't need to make them now. So so you can ignore me.
And then I have ulterior motives too, right? I mean, because if we go in and clean this up, right, I can use this as a lever to talk to other people, right? And so for me, this is also a useful communication tool for other people, right? Because of this work, right now I'm talking to people at Unidata, who do the NetCDF stuff. I mean, we're all in the same data ecosystem. And so I want to know the other people who are in this space, and that includes the NASA people, right? I mean, there's people there that use HDF5 as well, right? And so I wanted to talk to them. So this is also a way for me to communicate with other people who were in our community in the past and could be also in our community in the future, possibly with HDF5. So it's not just because of maintenance, right? It's because I also see that there's other value to it. But I want to like basically go nuts, and like what I was hoping to do was spend a month, go bananas, fix a bunch of the issues, and then be able to just have the thing in maintenance mode for the next couple of decades. And it turns out that like every time you lift up a rock, instead of there being a couple of bugs underneath, there's like dragons underneath. And so it's like, wow, there's like so many problems with this. And so we fixed a lot of it. And as for other stuff like ripping out the Fortran interface, if I could just rip it out wholesale, that'd be great. I would just do that, and then it would be gone, and then I wouldn't have to ever maintain it again.
Yeah, and you can do it because Fortran interface, as I said, it was for Windows users, right? And it's only MF supported for Windows. That's why, and the NetCDF people did the same. They separated Fortran interface, and probably this will be fine. But once again, talk to users.
Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, I'm hoping that we can over the next like year. I don't want to spend a lot of like staff time on more stuff, but will I go in and noodle around with it occasionally? Yeah, I probably will, right? Just because I find screwing around with old stuff fun, but that's not stuff that I would do as like part of my normal day job. But I would like it to get to the point where I can at least kind of have a much leaner thing that basically works. I mean, just switching the configuration stuff away from the hard-coded things is a big deal, because as new CPUs come online in the future, now we don't have to. Now we're not going to be as hard pressed to go run in and come up with some new config or do a release ASAP because somebody bought a whole bunch of RISC-V machines. So we're starting to get a lot of requests.
There is another problem. It is JPEG support, because JPEG is still what we are supporting. It's version 6A, right, beta, whatever. It has to be installed. It's not available on the systems. This is something has to be addressed. And SZIP, I know we did new version that is free, right? License free.
Yeah, we have in,
Yeah.
we actually test it now in the build, right? So it tests the base.
But JPEG is one of the issues that has to be resolved.
You know, when I install it on my virtual machines, the turbo JPEG works just fine. And that's like version 9.
Tests will fail because they expect, because it's lossy, and for each version of JPEG you'll have failing tests.
I don't think I noticed anything. The test that
maybe we fixed it for when it came, but when you use with, we can talk offline.
yeah, I haven't noticed anything. The only tests that we currently have that fail are, there's a few of the net CD. It's like one of the NC Gen tests still fails under a couple. We still have XDR failures with Mac if you use the system one. So you have to use the HDF version, but that does the Linuxy thing, and then everything's fine. We have some NC Gen failures with, I think, ARM. They still fail. And that's probably just a type problem, or I can't remember.
Do all NC tests pass?
Yeah, most of them do.
Not
There's
more.
like one NC Gen test that gives us some problems because it generates some stuff. I think it's generating incorrect code, and so we have to go through and like look and see what it does. And then there's a couple of tests that report errors but don't actually fail the test. And then there's others where the converse is true, where they don't report errors, but if I put check macros in, they fail the test. So those are things that we should probably address. I mean, I'm not going to hold the release over it because these are things that have clearly been around for decades, but it's something that we should probably try to address. But those are the only test failures that we have now. Everything else is passing across the board.
I will test it.
Oh yeah, please let me know. Feedback is great. I mean, one of the things that I'm concerned with is I ripped out so much stuff, and I know there's still people out there that have crazy systems that run AIX or Solaris and stuff like that on Spark hardware, and I have no way of testing any of this stuff. I mean, we still have a Spark machine, but there's a lot of stuff that we just don't have access to that I don't know, right? Like, you know, does somebody have Itanium? I don't know, right? Like, I took the stuff out for it. Does it work on Itanium? I think it should, but I mean, HDF5 works on Itanium, but like, I have no way of testing any of this. That's why I need to hear from the NASA people what they care about. Anything else? Thoughts?
So there, I'm not sure how much your team's paying attention to chat. There is a question in there about HDF View on HDF Viewer on macOS. Was your whole topic today just on an HDF4 update? Because I came with it, understanding the title was on HDF5 status and HDF5 releases. So maybe I missed the beginning of your talk.
Yeah, that was a typo. This should have been HDF4 and HDF5 releases. I can talk about the HDF5 releases. The release schedule is the same as on GitHub. We really haven't changed anything. The only thing that I did want to put out there is we did delay the 1.8.23 release a few weeks to make sure that everything worked with one API. A lot of people seem to be very concerned with one API, and so I wanted to make sure that you could build with their new compilers. Because if you just install the one API and you don't install the HPC toolkit, you don't get ICC. And so in i4tran, you get like ICX and IFX, and you get their fancy new C compiler, which I can't remember the name of it. It's like DCPP or something like that. And so I did test with that to make sure that that stuff worked. And so we gave it a little extra testing because I didn't want to release it and then have to do a 1.8.24 release in a few months because people were yelling about one API not working. So we did take a little bit of time for that. But 1.10, we were hoping to do that at the end of this month. Will that happen? It might get pushed into the first week of March, but everything's going pretty quickly. Where the stuff that we need to move in from develop into 1.10 is merging pretty smoothly. So maybe we'll see. Depends on. I mean, February is such a short month. There's just not a lot of time in it. But yeah, and then the 1.12.3, we still plan to do that final release, and that would be the end of the 1.12 line. And then the 114.1 release, that one's still, I mean, that is driven entirely by ECP needs. That we want to have one final release for the ECP people right before everything kind of closes out and has to be packaged up. And so that's just going to be, I think the last date that we can get that is sometime in May. So I'll probably do that release in April.
Will you merge new swimmer?
Probably not unless somebody comes along and has time to work on that. I mean, there's a lot of technical debt in that thing that like I'm uncomfortable with putting it in the library. It's a big change. Like that is, it's not just like, if it were just in a VFD, great, I would just merge it in like the Onion VFD. But that really, that's potentially, and we've never looked at the performance. I hate to put that in there and slow everything down. So we just don't have the staff for it right now. It'd be an unfunded mandate that would cost a lot of money to like put a person on that to. I mean, it's a nice thing to have, right? Like people do want to be able to do swimmer.
Simply, there was a big investment in it. In those, yeah.
It was.
Okay.
But I'm not going to use the sunk cost fallacy to justify putting that thing into the library.
I understand, but performance with new swimmer, I believe benchmarks were done and performance was good. There was no, unless something new.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to see it profiled and like with how it stands now.
Yeah, and okay, we will talk.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I mean, if there's people to address some of the technical concerns that were brought up, then sure.
Synchrotron community, experimental community was waiting for it.
Yeah, Eater would like it. Yeah, there's a lot of people who would like to have that feature. But we're a small company and it's hard to prioritize things that don't have active funding. But it could go in, and it's not a file format change because it uses the things that it uses from the VFD layer exist because we use them for other things. We brought over the control feature that VFD swimmer needed. And so that could go into a point release. So maybe not go into 114.1, but it could go into 114.2, potentially later in the year. So it's just, I don't think there's enough time between now and April, given the other things we have to do as a company. I don't think it's going to get prioritized, but maybe with more time than it could be. But there's stuff from it that could come in, right? Like John rewrote the page buffer cache. So we could potentially scissor that out, take out the bits that are VFD swimmer only and put that in. And because from what I understand, that had improvements. I was planning to sit down and look at that and see if that's something that could be done. And that brings in an important component of that at least. Makes the final merge easier. I said at time. Anything else? Right.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming and your spirited comments. And I did create an HDF4 category on the forum. And so people can go and take a peek there and comment on stuff. I think I may have already put some questions in there. And so I'm hoping that the HDF4 community will show up and hassle us and tell us what they want and what sucks, and so we can kind of get more feedback and not anger anyone, or at least strategically pick who we're going to anger. It's probably more accurate. Can't change anything without annoying somebody. All right, thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks, Dana.
Bye.